From the Mount Sinai Health System in New York City, this is Road to Resilience, a podcast about overcoming adversity. I'm John Earl.
I met this man, 81 years old, and as we're talking, he's like, you see that door? And he pointed towards the back door. He goes, that door is open, and it stays open ever since December 28th. And he told me, I sleep with my sneakers on. And I'm like, what do you mean you sleep with your sneakers on? And then he tells me, my wife is bedbound. And if I have to put on my sneakers and I have to save her, I'm not going to have time.
The interview you're about to hear was recorded in late February. A few days later, the first coronavirus case was confirmed in New York City, and everything changed. This interview is about resilience in the wake of a natural disaster. It centers on Puerto Rico, where a series of earthquakes around the new year left thousands homeless. With the ground still trembling, Mount Sinai's Hansel Arroyo and Lyse Aybar arrived on the island. They walked through affected areas, going door to door, and asking people how they were doing, like really doing. Dr. Arroyo is a psychiatrist, and Lisa manages a psychiatric emergency room. Together, they treated mental injuries and supported survivors' resilience. In our conversation, they share what they saw and what they learned. Their insights remain timely for Puerto Rico, which has endured more than 9,000 tremors this year, but also for communities across the country that are struggling to unite against COVID-19 and racial injustice, and even to imagine a brighter future together. So here is Dr. Hansel Arroyo and Lyse Aybar. So first of all, thank you guys both so much for being on Road to Resilience. I'm so glad to have you here and to talk about this trip. Where did this trip come about? You get a phone call, you get an email. How do you get included on a trip of people going to Puerto Rico to provide mental health services?
I heard through Dr. Sabrina Lim, who reached out via email that we're looking for bilingual mental health providers. And, they know that I have family living in Puerto Rico. So I just got like, are you interested? And I read through it, and I was like 100%.
You said you had family there. Yeah. What did you know about the situation?
I mean, I had been pretty close to what's been going on. So both my mom and my dad have informed me of every single time that there's an earthquake. And I've already heard how, even my mom was anxious, having trouble sleeping in the living room. It's something that you can't really prepare for. It's not like a hurricane, when a hurricane hits the island or as it's happened, where that's coming, the expected date. So essentially you just live in a constant kind of fear.
Yeah, it's like the perfect instrument for anxiety.
Absolutely.
Right,
yeah.
It's something that could upend your life at any moment, and you have no idea when it's going to strike.
Right.
Yes.
And as I understand it correctly, it was your first time in a disaster area.
Correct.
What were your feelings about that? Were you nervous? Did you feel like you were well prepared? What did you do to prepare?
So unfortunately, I was here for 9/11, right? And I worked at downtown at BI. So we were one of the hospitals, right? In proximity to the site. So mentally, I was prepared. I actually was expecting the worst because I had gone through disasters here living in New York City, and I was born and raised in New York, and you kind of build that thick skin to deal with certain situations.
What are some of the things you learned from the experiences of both Superstorm Sandy and 9/11 in terms of responding to these sorts of events?
So you have to come together. You have to unite. You have to lean on those that are stronger than you. You have to go into survival mode. I remember when Superstorm Sandy, which was you had to get to work because you were the only hospital standing. We call on our colleagues, how are you going to get in? What supplies are you bringing so I can bring supplies? So I think definitely communication and knowing what's the basic needs to survive.
Let's go to Puerto Rico. Tell me about your first day.
I woke up around 6. I was a little bit nervous, not sure what to expect. Got on this bus and drove down to Ponce. And that's when you start seeing the destruction. But the most impacting thing for me was how empty the spaces were. We would go into these communities and it would be like ghost towns. Cities that I've had gone through many times as a kid that were vibrant and filled with people, and now they were just kind of empty, and a lot of people have moved out. And so that was my first impression.
Lisa, describe the scenery for me. You arrive, you show up in one of these towns. What do you see? What do you feel?
So the first place we went to was an area where the rocks have fallen from the mountains and had affected people's homes, cars, and the area was closed off. So when we get there, I see this massive rock on someone's property, which fell on the car. And I was like, is that person alive? That's the first thing I asked, is that person alive? And they say yes. He had not gone to work yet. So that to me was like, how do you even go to sleep? Like, I would be afraid too to go to sleep. And that first day I arrived there, we're canvassing and we're talking to people. There was a 5.0 earthquake and we felt it.
You felt it? What did it feel like?
It's like standing on top over the MTA times 10, basically. When you feel the train going by, it's like times 10. But I processed it afterwards because at the moment you have to stay in control. Afterwards.
So you just acted like, oh, this happens all the time?
Yes.
In New York, we have earthquakes.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, exactly. I can deal with this.
So you get to these towns, right? You're experiencing earthquakes. You're seeing ghost towns. You're seeing people in distress. What are you doing? Are you going door to door? Like, how are you encountering people? How are they responding to you? What's that look like?
We would essentially go door to door and knock and say, good morning, good afternoon. We're volunteers. We would like to see if we could talk for a little bit, kind of get a sense of how you've been doing after the earthquakes. And people were very welcoming.
Everyone I encounter was embracing. Everybody wanted to speak. There was not one person that said, I don't want to talk to you, or I don't have time. They were always engaging. They were like, come in. I remember speaking to a lady and said, yes, I've gotten water. I have food. I have my medication, but no one has come here to ask me, how am I doing? How am I coping?
Take us to one encounter or one person whose story really moved you.
Well, I have a lot. Like I said before, I think I have stories for days. I met this man, 81 years old. He took me back to December 28th when there was initially some movement. And he's like, you see that door? And he pointed towards the back door. He goes, that door is open and it stays open ever since December 28th. And he told me, I sleep with my sneakers on. That broke my heart. And I'm like, what do you mean you sleep with your sneakers on? And he said, well, what if I have to run? If I have to put my sneakers on, it's going to delay me. And then he tells me my wife is bedbound. And if I have to put on my sneakers and I have to save her, I'm not going to have time. So that really touched my heart. I even get goosebumps just talking about it.
What did you say to him?
So,
you're there to provide mental health services.
Right.
What do you say to someone like that?
So first of all, I built on his strength, right? And I built on the fact that he's been in the service before. So he has a plan. And just acknowledge the fact that he's strong and how proud his wife must be of him and his children, because he has children in the States. And that he needs to take care of himself too, because I also told him, you got to take off your sneakers at some point. You have to relax a little bit and make sure that he ate well. We went over his plan, his medication. And what if, his plan doesn't work? What would he do next? That's to make sure his cell phone is always charged. Little basic survival skills we went over. But I think more, he helped me, if anything, become stronger.
That's interesting. You've now given 2 examples of when other people helped you to be stronger.
Yes.
The first was with the tremors,
yes.
And now the second was with this guy.
Yes, because we learn from each other, right? When you're going through natural disasters, you don't have the whole checklist. You've kind of built on each other to make it through the time, the struggles. And that's one thing I learned from there. We had to pull it together. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. So where I lack, he's stronger
You're talking
at
about the
it.
service, the group of service providers.
Yes. And even emotionally to help us walk through the community. We pull off for each other at the moment to debrief. Oh my God, did you just hear that? This is what's going on. So we kind of pull off each other to make it through.
Yeah. Hansel, do you want to add to that?
I feel like I also learned a lot from just being in this experience and meeting with people. I'll say that at times I felt very helpless. because in mental health, there's no easy fix, right? There's no like, take this antibiotics for 7 days. I'll see you like in a month and you're good, right? Like in mental health services often are cumulative. You see people on a regular basis. You can provide them medication and the symptoms do get better. But this was a very different scenario where we were mostly providing supportive psychotherapy and actively listening and providing feedback and accentuating their strength, like you were saying. That was like a key component of like, oh, you mentioned you've gone through this in the past and you're here, kind of repeating that to the individual so that can get solidified in their mind. But I have to admit that sometimes I also got sort of like had my breath taken out of me just from hearing these stories. There was this one woman that I think maybe you and I saw together, Lisa. She was this like elderly woman living in this very small house. And we started talking and she tells this, very tragic story of how her husband had recently died in the last few months, unrelated to the earthquake. And one of her sons had committed suicide during the period of where the earthquake had started. And she was pretty much left alone living in this house. And I noticed that the seal in the house was yellow. And I asked her, oh, do you feel safe in this house? I see that FEMA has marked your house as yellow.
Which means
that it's not very safe to be living in.
Yeah.
Right. And then she looks at me and says, oh, like that yellow sticker was from Hurricane Maria. That's not even from this time around. And I realized
Which was 3 years ago.
Which was 3 years ago. And like somehow she had managed to keep a positive outlook of, that things somehow would get better. I still don't know where she was tapping into to have that. But
I wonder if it was faith, or I wonder if it was something else. Just her
faith
constitution.
Faith was big. Mm-hmm. I think most households had a faith-based background.
And what does that look like in practice?
It gives people meaning, right? It gives people meaning. It gives people an explanation. We know that faith is a protective factor against things like suicide, and having some sort of connection to a religious community is super helpful, and develops like resilience. It protects people from having suicidal thoughts, and so it gives. And part of the theory is that it gives people meaning. This happened for a reason, right? As opposed to that this terrible disaster happened in a vacuum and there is no way out of it, and it just did, right? If you give it meaning, then you have meaning for yourself and for your life.
As a mental health provider, you learn to build on their faith. You ask them, what does that mean to you? And they would tell you, well, we didn't expect this magnitude, but if God put us here, he'll help us through it. When you're doing your intervention, you build on that strength. You always look for what's their strength, what's their biggest strength, and you build on it. And you make them future-oriented.
What do you mean by future-oriented? Say more.
Future-oriented in that the homes will be rebuilt. Schools will open again, which there was no school in session while we were there. The only schools that were open were the private schools, and they were very, very few. That they will be able to get back to their employments. The neighbors will be back even though they left. They will be able to get back to that pre-crisis mode that they were in.
It's like the opposite of like when people have panic attacks. When you have a panic attack or an anxiety attack, you are so overwhelmed by the feeling that you're experiencing, right? The increased heart rate, the shortness of breath, the kind of feeling vibrating, the feeling of an impending doom, and the inability to step outside of that moment and remember or think, oh, there's moments where I don't feel this way. So like that is like future orientation, where you think, when you realize, yeah, right now is bad, but this is not how every moment of my life is. So tapping into that, and especially with such short sessions or encounters, whatever you want to call it, that we had, that was like a lot of our goal, like tapping into people's strengths and building that up.
How would you take somebody from who maybe didn't have that future-oriented outlook and kind of bring them along to see a future for themselves?
That is overall challenging, regardless of which setting that we're in. So we would give them a scenario. Like, for example, this lady, I told her, let's say you have another earthquake. What would you do? We're experiencing one right now. What are we going to do? You're going to help me get out of here. So how are we going to do this? So giving them scenarios, role play, teach back, help them identify things that they will see if a crisis occurs.
Right. You figure out what people value. Everybody values something. We talked a little bit about how a religious background can be something of much value and can provide meaning, but people value family. People value seeing family members grow and age and seeing life progress. And so you can tap into things like that to develop hopefulness for the future.
I'm interested in resilience kind of on a community level. And I've been reading a lot. I know there's a lot of sociological work about the ways that communities bounce back from disaster. And there's an irony in it. And it's in the fact that many times in the wake of a natural disaster, people are brought together in common purpose. And they often look back on those moments as being full of joy and full of meaning. And I'm wondering whether you experienced that in Puerto Rico. You saw neighbors helping neighbors. You saw meaning and resilience kind of building up from the ground floor, as it were.
Yeah. So we did see a lot of that. The community definitely came together. So one thing I observed about being there is that in the community, like within the 3-block radius, you have the grandmother lives there, the aunt, the cousin. Everybody's kind of family, and those that are not our family, even though they're not blood related. I saw many people whose homes were not destroyed, and everyone else's home was destroyed, and they brought them in. They're not at the base camp. They're not in a tent sleeping outside their home. There was a neighbor who brought in her neighbor who has a history of dementia, brought her in, and she's been staying with her, ensuring that when the earthquake happened, everyone hit the streets and start calling the neighbor's name. Maria, where are you? Jose, where are you? Making sure that everyone was alive. And I think overall, the community is very, very united. Very.
Yeah, very much so. There were the government-based camps where people can go and you can set up your own tent, but not everybody liked being at the government-based camps because there was some restrictions of playing loud music, being able to drink, having to go to bed at a certain hour. So a lot of people stayed in their own community and congregated around the main park or a basketball court and set up their tents there. And that was sort of these makeshift camps. Right? They weren't being encouraged to do this by the government. They were just happening organically. And people felt safer because they were together with a group of people that they knew from their own community. They also feel safer because they were closer to their homes or whatever was left of their homes. I think it's human nature, right? We're social beings. It's human nature to kind of want to seek each other and try to help each other in a certain way. I think it's easy to put your differences aside in the moment of need.
Yeah, I think exactly. And this is one of the things I find so interesting. It's there are two conceptions of how we are. What is human nature, right? There's one that assumes that the veneer of civilization is very thin. The slightest crack, every man for himself, pandemonium breaks loose. When in fact, it sounds like in many of these instances, what happens is that resilience and connections start generating almost immediately, and they cross all the sorts of fissures that we normally see in our society, whether it's class or race or what have you. I think that's so inspiring.
Mm-hmm. There was this study that was done in some of the survivors of the Pulse shooting in Florida, where the goal was to test or to create a narrative what was resilience in this context. And one of the main things that the survivors reported was community building, right? Developing a community helped. And when this happened, this shooting happened, people came together, and that was the huge protective factor for them. And it's a key component of developing resilience, right? Developing community.
Yeah, and also I think helping them tap into their own awareness, how to survive, right? Because they went through this natural disaster, but this is not their first, So we tapped into as well previous experiences. They had the hurricanes, but we also tapped into their own family, inner circle disasters. Yeah.
In your story, you can find examples of resilience.
Exactly.
Think about that, and that will help you through this.
Exactly, yes.
So going back to what we were talking about a moment ago with the community resilience in the wake of disasters, whether it's Pulse or whether it's a natural disaster. One of the reasons I was so eager to bring that up is because I think with climate change, we can expect these sorts of things to happen. Well, not earthquakes, but other forms of natural disasters more frequently. So it's important to talk about it and talk about the sorts of things that happen and the ways to prepare. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts along those lines, based on your experience in Puerto Rico. What sorts of things could a listener be thinking about prior to an event like this?
Well, with hurricanes, not so much earthquakes, I feel that there's a start point and there's an end point. So if people would start thinking that we're going to get through this, like it'll start at this time and it's expected to end at this time, and we can prepare emotionally, physically, we can prepare for disasters, for natural disasters, and build on your community to make themselves stronger.
Yeah. One of the ways to develop resilience is to help people find groups of individuals in which they can identify with. If you're attached to a community, whether, religious, racial, based on gender, sexual orientation, whatever it is, that actually helps you be more resilient and snap back from stressful situations. So I would wonder if there's like a way to promote that before disasters happen. I mean, you're talking about it almost in a prophylactic way, right? How do we help people?
Well, it sounds like if simply investing in communities for yourself, right. It's like building those connections to groups of people and with whom you feel a deep affinity, mm-hmm. like as a general life practice. Mm-hmm. we talk a lot about social isolation nowadays, and
or tribal mentality.
But it seems like that is a healthy way to prepare, not only to enrich your life now, but mm-hmm. to prepare for something like this happening. Right. So do you have any plans to do another deployment?
I do. I already said that there was another one, I would go. There is a need. I mean, there is such of a dire need that I feel I can't sit back and not do more. I was introduced to this world out there, and I can't just leave it out there without knowing how they're doing. It's just part of who I am. And I think that, like I said, if I can help, why not, Even if it's one person we impact.
Yeah, I agree. I would do it in a heartbeat. And, part of the plan was this first phase was a little bit of developing an assessment of what was the major need in the island. We ended up seeing 1,200 people, the entire team, during that week period. And so now we're collecting data and trying to determine what are the major needs, what were the major symptoms, diagnoses. And then the second stage is that, just to kind of analyze the data. And the third stage was to create a form of ongoing therapy, whether it's through telepsych or whether it's sending another team. We're not sure what that's going to look like, but yeah, 100% I would be involved in it. I mean, it's like once you tap into it, like you were saying, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And, for me, it's like kind of personal. My family is still there and they experience this on a regular basis. So yeah, I would go in a heartbeat.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for your work and for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Hansel Arroyo is the Director of Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine at the Institute for Advanced Medicine and the Center for Transgender Medicine and Surgery here at Mount Sinai. Lyse Aybar is Clinical Manager in the Psychiatric Emergency Room at Mount Sinai Beth Israel. Road to Resilience is a production of the Mount Sinai Health System in New York City. It's made by Katie Ullman, Nikki Hudson, and me, John Earl. Lucia Lee is our executive producer. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. I know I say this every time, but it's true. It helps other people find the show, and so we really appreciate it if you could do that. Thanks. We'll be back soon with more episodes. And until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.